Hello, everyone. Thank you for making time for us. Today is Michael Weiss joining us today. Michael Weiss is a product leader from Zillow Group. He is focused on mobile product management, and his path to product is different than the most. He spent his years in marketing, doing experimentation, analytics, and then he got a call and he was like, okay, I'm going to join the product team. Finally, I understand users enough from having worked in marketing to apply some of my user skills into the product world. And he has been working in product world for a long time. He also has a background in anthropology of all the places. So it makes him even a more powerful product leader given that background. So very happy to have you here, Michael. Thank you for joining us today. Anything else that I missed that you may want to introduce yourself on, that any interesting things about you or any other accomplishments?
Sure. So, yeah, I mean, I think that hit it. I mean, the only other fun fact is I'm a twin that everyone always likes to learn. And we don't have telepathy, and I couldn't tell you what he's thinking right now. But yeah, I think that nailed it well. I guess we'll leave it up to my coworkers and peers to see whether or not all of the anthropology background is actually an asset or a hindrance.
Wonderful. Hey, I'm going to turn off my video. You are the star of the show. Before we get started, I just wanted to share that Product Manager HQ has launched a boot camp. So any of you, if you're interested in joining a product job guaranteed 12-week boot camp, please reach out to us. With that said, today's show is about mobile product management. And Michael has worked for many years in Zillow Group as a mobile product manager. So to start things off, I'll ask him this question, which is something I always start my conversations with, which is how would you characterize your day, Michael? What is your typical day like?
Yeah. So I think it's worth kind of taking a step back. So I joined Zillow about a year and a half ago on the rental side. And for those in the US probably are familiar, and maybe even those who've seen the SNL skit internationally are familiar with it as well, but we're a two-sided marketplace, right? So I work on rentals where it's all about connecting renters and landlords together. And, you know, Zillow is, it's an incredible organization, and it's one where, you know, kind of ironically, we're still very much figuring out how do we, you know, think and act mobile first. So even though we have one of the, you know, we have the #1 app in the real estate world, we're constantly included and featured in all of the WWDC type demos and things. You know, we still as an organization are trying to still internalize and figure out what does that mean. So how does that characterize my day? Well, the short answer is my day is always different. And, you know, and I'll give you some examples, right? So on the rental side, I am the lone mobile PM that works on the landlord app, which is for Zillow Rental Manager, as well as now features within the Zillow real estate app that everyone probably has on their phone today. And as such, you know, my day is basically like, my job is sort of twofold. On the one hand side, it's basically trying to unblock and help solve problems on behalf of the team. Thankfully, I work with an incredible team and an organization where individuals are empowered to get the job done. So they don't have to come to me to help solve their problems, but I'm here ultimately to, you know, figure out how do we ask questions, what are we getting done? But a large part of what I do day to day is basically figure out how do we get people to rethink how they approach and think about the app internally in the organization. So that's everything from, you know, trying to figure out how do we highlight ways in which the app experience is different than the web experience. And while this seems rudimentary, you know, the entire rental, you know, the entire mobile team that I work with, we're 11 developers strong, right? But we do an immense amount of work, but that also means we're entirely resource constrained. So every day is like, how do we put out a fire? What are the things that we have to prioritize? And that's on me to figure out that prioritization. And, you know, the way that I think about my role is, you know, one of the best pieces of advice I ever got was when I was back in my entertainment days. And I would walk celebrities down the red carpet at various events and go through different press junkets. And, you know, the thing that always stood out to me was, you know, they're obviously tired by the time they get to the end of it, having to repeat the same answer a million times over. But the reality is it's the 100 millionth time you've said that, but it's the first time that someone else is hearing it. And so, again, to bring this back to what do I do in terms of evangelizing? So it's constantly trying to say, what are the two things that I want to accomplish on behalf of the mobile team? And that can be something as big as, okay, how do we completely rethink the way in which mobile is done within the rentals group? So that way other teams are incorporating mobile designs into what they're doing, and how, as we're thinking mobile first, what are some of the opportunities that we have to drive value through the mobile app, et cetera. So, the long story short is the day to day differs, but it ultimately comes down to prioritizing an insane number of meetings. I think that's the reality of product management. You ultimately don't have the authority. Your job is truly to influence and get buy-in. So you're constantly having to meet with everyone to get them up to speed and communicate and make sure everyone's on the same page. And then when you aren't in meetings, you got to figure out, how are you adding value for the team and for the business?
Very interesting. Thank you for sharing that, Michael. One thing I took away from this is that there are a lot of meetings where you go in and you have to say probably the same thing, but in a different way because it's a different audience. And that's my biggest takeaway from this, from your entertainment world, right? You were saying, you had an interesting quote there. You're saying the same thing for the 1,000th time, but it's a different audience and something along those lines. So thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that.
Yeah, for sure. I think the only other thing I would add, or the way that I kind of think about it, is there's always too many things to do and there's always too much to get done. So when it comes to prioritization, you yourself have to prioritize, what is it that I want to accomplish? So I set, okay, this year for 2021, I have 3 big things that I want to get done as a team that are overarching, right? That just cover the gamut of, it's not specific to the user experience. It's not specific to teams and structure. It's just big picture. When we look back, how will we know we've moved forward, right? And that's kind of what I mean about having to repeat the same thing over and over in a million different ways, is like really, really think about, you can't have more than 1 or 2 at any given point. So if you already have to be like, oh, well, there's this, you got to streamline it. You have 1 or 2 things that you can talk both to your team and to management and to your peers and to everyone else with, that you want to get done. So focus, really hone in on what that one thing is that's going to drive value and work.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thanks for sharing that. Curious on some of the challenges as you go through your day to day on that one thing, or any other things that you think are like serious challenges or friction, when it comes to your role.
Absolutely. So the biggest challenge that I have personally within my role is, thinking about the app as a channel, right? So while there are dedicated teams on the rental side that own just applications and just leases and just payments and just listing, for example, and that's just within the landlord experience, the app does them all, right? And so the biggest challenge day to day is, how deep do I need to get into a particular vertical or a particular issue, versus relying on my peers who are really the vertical owners and are going to be significantly more knowledgeable about the nuances of why we did X versus Y, or the decision to move forward for this particular reason, right? It's something that I'm still figuring out, to be perfectly honest with you. But that to me is a key distinction between like my role versus other people's role. And I know we'll get to that as well. But the degree to which you can dive in the weeds, because I can't be the expert for every single piece of the pie that app owns as a channel, but I can be the expert on behalf of the app, right? When it thinks about mobile first and retention and some of those opportunities there, and ways in which app can enhance some of those other experiences, sure. So it's really trying to find that balance is super tricky.
Yeah, that's very interesting. App as a channel, I like that. Diving a little deeper there, what have you found, Michael? What have you found as an effective way to succeed in your role? If someone were to start as a mobile product manager and they're just getting started, what specific frameworks or heuristics or thinking models would you recommend for them to come up to speed or become a successful product leader or product manager in the mobile space?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know if meaningfully there are going to be things that are so specific to mobile from a framework perspective. I think, and to be honest, I'll leave the frameworks to the John Cutlers of the world and the Shreyas of the Shreyas Dohar, I believe his name is, who's kind of taken product Twitter by storm. I'll leave it to them to really like dive into the frameworks and kind of open eyes. I think from my perspective, it is truly about one, I think thinking small. App has and mobile has a very distinct pattern and interaction. And so, how those things translate into an experience is different, and it requires different thinking, and it requires a lot of pushing back, because the inherent default is going to be, taking, for example, here are web designs, here's mobile web designs, even better. Just go, make the equivalent on app, right? But we shouldn't just be making the equivalent. We should be thinking about what makes sense to translate and what makes sense to actually leverage natively. And I would say that leverage native piece is huge. Like, that's the part where it comes with time. It comes with asking a lot of questions, and really it comes with just a lot of reading of, like, with every year we get new operating systems. What is the latest and greatest? What can't we do? And honestly, I think the other piece is just talking to as many customers as you can, and making sure that you're never losing sight of the customer throughout that experience. So that would probably be my number one thing is, you're not doing your job if you're not getting customer feedback and you're not actually getting them on the phone or in a Zoom or whatever channel you're using to just talk and engage and understand what's working, what's not.
Got it. By the way, we will be having a question and an answer after 4:30. At 4:30, we will open it up for questions. But if you do have questions, if you have any questions, feel free to put it in chat, or feel free to raise your hand and I'll unmute you and you can ask your question. So that's that. I'm going to have a follow up on that, Michael. That's very, very articulate answer. I'm curious, you mentioned something about native, right? How do we enhance the experience for mobile native experiences? I'm curious, how do you manage the parity of user experiences or features between mobile and non-mobile experiences when it comes to nativity and things of that nature? Yeah, operating systems and all that. Yeah, so I'm very curious about that.
Yeah, I'm laughing because I feel like that probably is the better answer in terms of what does it mean to be a mobile PM? I think the parity and the conversation around parity is going to be so core to what you're doing. And so for context, parity is basically just trying to create an equivalent experience natively in the app. And so native means that it's code. So there's two ways to basically have an app experience, right? You can program it, which is native, and that looks to leverage the actual operating system itself. So for example, when you want to make a call, it's tap to call, or the share icon on any screen. All of those are native type experiences, right? But the other option is WebView. And WebView is a cheaper, more cost-efficient route, because it basically means you can slice the frame with a bunch of wrappers and a variety of other things. You can get your page into the app experience, but it comes at a cost. And that cost is often that you're still a URL inside an app, which means that you're subject to an insane number of issues and gremlins that you will never fully triage and understand, because it's basically just a game of whack-a-mole, depending on, so parity is, so that's kind of the context. In terms of how we handle it, so the organization, I'll give you some context, this is the $1 million question, literally and figuratively, right? Is like, do we build for parity? not just build for Parity, but do we just leverage WebView and have that be the go forward, or do we try to build natively? Building natively takes time, it takes resources, it builds debt, right? Not just in terms of tech debt, but design debt, and just everything across the board changes when suddenly everyone is connected to one platform. So now you can't just a backend service. So, you know, an update from the web team can break the app experience, right? So how do I think about it? It comes down to number one, I think, time and resources. So what is your priority and what are your goals, right? As a group and as an organization, we have OKRs and things that we want to hit. So the first thing is, you know, is spending this money and time going to drive value towards that? Yes or no? The answer can be no, and we'll still do it. But if it is no, then the next question I ask is often, okay, well then what is it set up for us that enables us to get closer towards whatever that goal and objective is? Personally, I think what often gets lost when we talk about technology and building things, you know, there's this myth and ethos just because of Facebook of, you know, move fast, break things, and cool, that's great. But I think what's lost is that building things takes time. And so I'm kind of like going in circles with your question, but what I would say is the way that I think about it is very much one, parity. There's a parity gap the moment you start a site, unless you are mobile first or starting with an app, which for 99% of the people probably isn't the case. So the reality is you have to be ruthless to say, okay, what is going to add the most value and what are the things that I can leverage natively that make the most sense? Again, to drive both value to the customer, value to the business, make it easier for the team to build and scale. Like, you know, that all of that is worth it. Building for the sake of building is not something I am a proponent of, but God damn it, we need get those web views out of those apps, man. On the other side, the last thing I'll say is, you know, there's a lot more technologies where it's build once, deploy twice, right? So the Flutters of the world, even I don't know if it's
Ionic,
a Kotlin, I should say. So, you know, there are all these opportunities where like React is a big one, right? Where it's like, I can build once and deploy twice, but recognize that a React, there are nuances to a React app that I would argue is not entirely native. It's really just a glorified web experience within an app experience. But it does have code and leverages code. So it's, you know, we'll see how those develop. I think those are actually really exciting, and there's lots of cool opportunities down the road for them.
Thank you, Michael.
I don't know if that answers.
Yeah, no, that was one of the best articulated answers on the topic. And thank you for speaking your truth. I really appreciate it. Yeah, that was very well articulated. Beautiful. Thank you. I'm going to have to listen to that a few times because you drop in a lot of little nuances there. And I think there is so much to pick apart in that one answer. But philosophically, I think you conveyed the message, which is figure out where you can add the most value and then execute in that direction. You don't necessarily have to replicate the web experience, and you don't have to build for the sake of building. You do have to put on your executive hat and figure out where the users are going to get the most value from, and then create those experiences most effectively. So, but yeah, one thing I want to follow up on that question is you just, that was a very strategic as well as a very technical answer, both combined together, a classic PM answer. For the people who are aspiring to become PM, what is their, especially mobile product leader, what are some of the technical skills you recommend they pick up along the way? And if they need to pick up any technical skills, like, first of all, that's like up for debate, right? So one, if that's the case, and then second, if that is the case, then like what are those skills? Where do they get it?
I mean, I think this is going to be a debate for the end of time. certainly for the next 5 to 10 years. I think we'll get into, so in terms of what skills specifically, I think technical skills, I don't think you need to be a programmer to be a PM. I think there are certain roles that being very technical and understanding that will be a significant benefit. Absolutely. I am someone, I like to consider myself like technical light, right? Like I can't write code, but I can look at code and understand what the code is logically trying to do. And does that help me? Not really, but I can look over, when I was at Macy's, I would literally look over the dev's shoulder sometimes as they're working on stuff. And like, as we're trying to triage a problem and just understand, okay, how do we move forward? That was helpful. So I think that a willingness, like the technical skills, I think if you can take time to learn, just to like go through a couple things in Swift and playgrounds for Swift, or go try to do something. I don't think you have to build anything personally, but what I would say is you do need to just think about in general with a PM is like, where's the data coming from? How do we get access to it? What data do we need? And how do we want it to render, right? Like, I mean, that's kind of like the very basics of any experience. And the more you understand how the data flows, the better off you're going to be. Because the one thing I'll say is technical skill, where the technical skills can come in. And if you don't have the technical skills, it's really just about learning how to ask the right questions, such that the hardest thing in the world isn't, for me personally, like I'll speak from my own experience. The thing that I continue to develop and grow and challenge myself on isn't like necessarily figuring out the happy path of what I want the customer to do. What I'm still figuring out how to do really well is what are the right questions I need to be asking, so that when the user deviates, which they're going to do, and they're going to do it at the most inopportune time that you never thought about, what do we do then, right? Like that to me is where I think your skills should be applied towards, because as you're thinking through a feature, as you're thinking about an opportunity and what is the addressable market, and like, is this thing going to add value, and how do we test and validate? Oh, and now I got to write the requirements, or at least I have to work with design to build this experience. And you have to partner with engineering along the way. But once you get to the point where you're actually at the requirement stage, there should be clarity around what we're doing, why we're doing it, and also what happens, like what if this, what if that, because I can guarantee you within 2 seconds, the engineers, as soon as they get into it, that's what they're going to ask and think about, right? Because they're the ones in the code looking at how it actually works. So I don't think you need to be technical. I am not, but I think you need to be willing to figure out how do you ask yourself the right questions and learn and observe, such that you can just poke and prod against your own biases throughout the process.
Wow, yeah, that was really well articulated. Thank you, Mike. Following up on that, curious on one trait that you just mentioned, which is important for product managers, is being able to be self-awareness of their own bias. Are there any other behavioral traits specifically for mobile product people that you recommend for succeeding as a product leader or product manager in mobile space, behavioral traits?
I mean, that's a good question. I think, so I would say behaviorally, I think it's listening. You need to be, the role of the PM is to listen, because it's not just to listen to the customers, listen to the business, but it's really to like distill what you're hearing into something actionable. And I think that can often get lost when everyone is thinking about, well, this is the cool thing that I can build, right? Everyone wants to move from idea to what it is, right? But there are a lot of steps in between that you have to validate. And I think that listening is a key part of that. And I think I would probably just say like being willing to always ask a question. Like that seems really rudimentary and like potentially eye rolling, but there's always so much going on, that, and you have to, again, like, it's not just like going against biases, but it's also just validating an assumption, right? Like, what am I hearing? Is what I'm hearing correct, right? Like at Macy's, we were always taught, so what I'm hearing is X, Y, and Z, and you just regurgitate it, right? And just in that regurgitation, you're building a bond and trust, because guess what? That person feels like they've been heard. But also for you, you're able to internalize it in a way that you can therefore move forward with whatever that next step is. So I would probably say those two are the ones that immediately come to mind.
Thank you. Yeah. And you also touched on my following question, which is how do you build trust and bond and influence with your technology partners? You mentioned you have a team of 11 developers working on the rental portion of your app. What is the day-to-day like with them? How do you not day-to-day, but how do you build the trust and influence over some of their own vision that they may have versus your vision versus the vision of the company? How do you find alignment between all these visions and building trust and influence, right? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it comes down to three things. The first is what you see is what you get. The same way I'm talking to you is the same way I talk to devs, is the same way I talk to the VPs. Like, I'm wearing a tie today. I wish I would say it was because I'm dressing up for you lovely people, but the reality is, like, it's Tie Tuesday. Like, this is just a random thing I do that's fun, that breaks up and just demonstrates some personality. So I think is like, be yourself. I inherently want to make jokes and have fun. And so I think that also helps me ensure that an executive is going to read my email, because I literally am inserting random jokes and sarcasm into a very professional business email, which I try to toe the line on. And I recognize that it's not for everyone, but be who you are, right? And that is obviously the best way to do it. I think the second thing is, you have to put your money where your mouth is, right? So I generally am known as the person that gets things done and is able to solve problems, right? And I solve problems throughout my career. I've always been the person that everyone has come to be like, Mike, I don't know how to do this. And I'm like, I don't know how to do it. But if I'm in your shoes, these are the three things I would be thinking about. And like, let's go figure it out together, right? So I think that ultimately results in like an insane amount of accountability, a willingness to help as part of that, the ability to help others, and do it not for yourself, but do it because you genuinely want to help, shouldn't be overlooked. And I think the other thing is like, trust comes from that ability to follow through, right? It's easy to talk, but it's really hard to follow through. And so when you promise a date, deliver. When you say you're going to do something, do it. And even if you didn't do all of it, communicate that, which gets into the third part, which I think is like over communicate. As you can see, I can talk with the best of them. But the teams will always know where they stand, what's going on, and the fact that like I'm an open book. So like if they have a question, I want to help them, I want to answer it, and I want to make sure that they have everything they need. So there's never ambiguity. I mean, that's not true. There's always going to be some. I'm not perfect by any stretch, but my goal and what I strive for is, by over communicating, ensure that there's less room for issues and assumptions. And frankly, people know what to expect, right? Like, problems arise when assumptions don't match expectations. So my job is to make sure that like when I'm we're going through a massive project internally right now, which we've been basically working on all year. Now we're in the weeds and we're trying to build it. And literally the designs aren't finalized. We're supposed to launch within the next 2 months. And, I'm going to go on a limb and say, we're probably not going to get finalized designs for a month, but we still have to figure out how to deliver, right? And that means that dev is going to have to redo some of their work. So how do we make sure that what they're working on, that we can reduce that amount, and frankly, not have it be so painful when they have to. And I think that all of those three things that I just talked about are a key part of that. And also just like celebrate wins. Like, I think everyone's a bit too heads down trying to get things done. Like, let's peek our heads up and actually celebrate the fact that like we did this thing, and it can be super small, but isn't that amazing? We just did that.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Michael Weiss. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for sharing your hard-earned knowledge. And below this video, there will be a way to connect with Michael. So feel free to reach out to him when you do. All right. Well, that concludes it. Thank you so much, Michael. I appreciate your time. We'll be following up with you when the recording is polished and ready to go.
Sounds good. Thanks, everybody. Enjoy. Cheers.
Thank you.